Hi, my name is Sarah, and this is the fourth tutorial in a series of 5 that will show you how to create a health system. So for this part of the tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create a health system using icons, for example, hearts, kind of like the health system in Zelda. So this requires you to have done part 1 and 2, but you can skip part 3 as that is about text and this is about icons. Okay, so if you've completed part 2, where we had gotten to was we had a player with a numerical health value, and we had hazards that also had a numerical damage value when it could be set in Unity, and whatever you set it to, whenever the player hit that hazard, that much health would be deducted from the player. But we didn't have any way to show that. So the plan for this tutorial is to cause that health to be displayed using icons. So let's think about, as always, our condition and our action. In this case, our condition will be every frame we're going to check something, but we're going to specifically check what the number is, and we're going to hide or show objects based on that. So we're going to actually have a series of actions and conditions and actions here. We're going to go along for each of our icons, and for each icon we're going to say if the player's health, or some variable, you could use this same condition for something else, if the player's health is less than, equal to, greater than, so compared to a specific number, then we want to hide or show that object. Okay, so in this case, we're going to be looking at the first heart, and we'd say, okay, that represents your health being at a value 1. You only have 1 health left. So if your health is 1 or more, we should show that heart, and if your health is less than 1, we should hide the heart. Then we would go on to the second heart, and that one has the value 2 associated with it. And we'd say, if your health is 2 or more, we will show the heart. And if your health is less than 2, we would hide the heart. So that's how we're going to go along for each of those heart icons in our display. And we're going to do that with only one script, which means we're going to use something called a loop. And you may not have used a loop before, so I'll explain how that works, and you will see that shortly. So the first thing we need to do is to get a UI in our scene and create our heart icons. Now, you may already have a UI in your scene. I do in mine because my player is moved by these UI buttons because I have a sort of mobile themed game here, but you may not have a UI yet. Thankfully, it's really easy to make one. All you have to do is create an element that would go on a UI, and it will create the canvas object for you, and it will put your new object that you create inside the canvas. So to create that, you would go up to Game Object in the top left corner of your screen, and you would choose a UI element, and we're going to use an image for this tutorial. So you would go to UI, and then you would go to Image. Okay, and it's going to create this hideous white square. And we're going to put our white square in the top left corner, and then we're going to turn it into a heart. So I already have some heart icons. You can use whatever kind of icon you like. I have a heart here, so I'm going to put the heart onto that. So we now have an image. It's a little bit, and you can notice it's a little bit big there. What I'm going to do is, let's see, we can make it a little smaller if you want to. So let's make it 500. Oh no, it's already 100. Let's make it at 50. And we'll put it in the top left corner. So now we have one heart, but we want multiple hearts. Okay, so first let's change the name of this image because we never want to leave things as the default name. We will right click and rename and change it to a heart icon. All right, there we go. So once you have the heart icon, you can then make more of them. So let's go ahead and use Control D or right click and duplicate our heart icon to make another one, and we can move it to the sides. And we can make another one, and we can move it to the side. Now I'm placing these, and I don't know if they're really very accurately placed, right? I'm just kind of eyeballing it, and maybe we want them to be exactly equally distant apart. So how do we do that? Well, thankfully it's very easy. We can create another UI element. So if we go up to Game Object and go to UI, we can create another UI element. Now, I don't believe it's actually in here. So let's just create an empty game object. If you right click on your canvas, which is the container for your UI, and you create an empty game object, We're going to call this heart root. This is going to be the root object for our hearts, and our hearts will become child objects of this root. And what we want is we're going to add a component in our heart root. And the component we're going to add is the horizontal layout group. And this component will automatically move all the child objects for this game object into a nice horizontal line. So it won't do anything right now because there's no child objects. What we need to do is put our hearts into our heart root. So let's select all the hearts by clicking on the top one, holding down Shift and clicking on the bottom one, and drag them all into heart root. And now we have a single game object here for the hearts. And we can then put it back in the top left, and our hearts are now in an equidistant line from each other and are all nicely laid out. Now they might be spaced a little bit too widely. For my hearts they are, because my heart image has some extra space on the side. So if you want to fix that, if you click on your heart root, you can open up the padding and the spacing. So I think the spacing is what we want here, and we can put that spacing at maybe -10, makes them a little bit smaller. If you use a bigger number, they'll be farther apart. So if your hearts go right up to the edge and you want a little bit of space between them, you could actually use a larger number for spacing. I'm going to go ahead and use -15 looks good to me. So now I have 5 hearts up there, and they are all equally spaced. Now the next thing I'm going to do is change the name of these hearts. I'm going to say heart icon 1, and if you click on it, my first heart icon doesn't have any 1, 2, 3, or 4. It's on the left up here. And that's going to represent 1 hit point. So we kind of want to name it in a way that makes that clear. So I'm going to change the name to be heart icon, where's my rename? Heart icon -1. And then I'm going to change the next one in the line to be heart icon -2, and the next one will be heart icon -3, heart icon -4, and heart icon -5. Now you will need the same number of hearts as the number of health you want your player to have. So the heart or icon based health system is not suitable for having like 20 health. Right? You need to only have small amounts of health. Now, I know some games have partial hearts whenever you have kind of in between, either a half or even a quarter of heart. This, I'm not going to teach you how to do that. You can actually do that with the same system that we're talking about here. But for now, especially because usually if you're using this tutorial, you're a beginner, I would recommend keeping it very simple and just having entire hearts for your icons rather than using half hearts or quarter hearts. You can do it with the same code, but it's a bit more complicated. So just keep it a bit simpler. There's no reason to make it more complicated for this particular project. Okay, so I've now got heart icon 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 because my character has 5 health. If your character only has 3, then you would only need 3 heart icons. If your character has 10 health, you would need 10. And you could potentially put those heart icons, if you have like 10, you could use a grid layout group instead of a horizontal layout group so that you can actually have multiple rows if you wanted to. Okay, so for now we're going to assume you only have around 5 and you're using a horizontal layout group. Okay, next up, once you have now created your heart icons and put them where you want, and they're all visually set up as you want, we need to actually create our our script for displaying these hearts and only showing the ones that your player actually still has. Okay, so let's go to scripts. We're going to right click on scripts. We're going to go up to create, and we're going to choose a C# script, and we're going to call this health display. Okay, so let's open up health display once you've created it. And inside here, we will be using the start and update functions. So we're going to leave those in this time, okay? But the first thing we need to do is add a variable at the top. So we need 2 variables here. We need 1 variable to hold our heart icons, and we need 1 variable to hold our player, because we're going to need to ask the player for information. So by keeping a reference, a variable with the player stored in it, It's almost like we have the player's phone number and we can call them up and ask them, hey, what's your current health? Because I need to display it on the screen. Okay, so that's why we need to keep a reference to the player there. But we also need a reference to the health icons. And this is where it gets a little more complicated because our health icons aren't just one object. We have 5 in my case, or you might have 3 or 10 or whatever. You have multiple icons there to represent your player's health. So how do we make that work in code? Well, we use something called an array. And an array is essentially a list of multiple objects, but they're all stored in a single variable. And you access them by going, what's the first one in this list? What's the second one in this list? You use a number to access them to determine which one in the list you're looking at right then. So how do we write an array? Well, first of all, we need to say what kind of object is in the array. And in this case, we're going to use the game object type. So every object in Unity is a game object. So we're just going to say game object, and that means what's in that array will be the game object for the health icon, the entire game object that has all the components on it. Okay, so let's start by writing the word game object, and that is the type of the variable, the type of thing that's in there. Then we need to indicate that it's not a single game object, it's a list of them, it's an array of game objects. And to indicate that, we use these square brackets, okay, square brackets. That indicates that this is an array. Okay, and then we just give it a name, just like we would with any other variable. So let's call this health icons with an S to indicate there are multiple icons in that list. Finally, we want this to be visible in Unity because we are actually going to assign these icons to this list in Unity. So let's put the word public at the beginning of that variable, and that will make it visible in Unity. Now let's add a note to ourselves so we remember what this is for. You don't have to write all of these notes out. These are comments. They're just there to help you, but you may want to write some of them, whatever maybe you don't understand or you maybe want to make sure your future self does understand. So we can say what the variable is. This will contain a list of the game objects for the health icons. Public means shown in Unity. This weird square brackets means this will be an array list. And game object with square brackets means this list will contain game objects. The things in the list will be game objects. Okay. So then we need to have our actual player, and this one doesn't need to be public because we're going to assign it using a special function in our start function. Okay, so let's just call it, it's going to be the player, and instead of containing a game object, we're going to have it contain specifically the player's health script, because that's what we want to talk to. We don't want to talk to the entire game object on player, we want to talk to the health script on player, because that's what we're going to call up and ask, what is the health of the player right now? So we just make the type of variable player health, and the name of the variable, let's just call it player with a lowercase p. Remember that the variables should have a lowercase starting letter and no spaces, just like our health icons up here. Lowercase starting letter and no space, and the second word, if any, will be capitalized. Okay, and we can leave a note for ourselves here. This will contain the player health component that is on the player game object. So we can ask it for information about the player's health, right? That's the whole point of it. So let's go down to the start function. So the start function is used for what is called initialization. In Unity, you can use either start or awake for that. In this case, we're using start, and the reason for that is because we are going to be asking Unity about other game objects, all right, not just our own. So the reason, that's why we need to use the start function, because start happens after awake. So those game objects should now have had a chance to get set up and initialized. Start happens later in the process, so we're going to use that whenever we are asking about other game objects. Okay, so let's go ahead and write out the code for this. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be assigning an object to our player variable. The health icons will already be assigned in Unity, so we don't have to initialize that one. We do need to initialize our player variable. So we do that by saying player equals, because that's how you store something into a variable. You say variable name equals. And what we're going to put in here is the result of a built-in Unity function. And that function is called find objects, or object, sorry, no S there, object of type. And we're going to use angle brackets to tell what type this object is. So usually when you're working with types of objects, you're going to use angle brackets. So we're going to put in player health here, and then we're going to use parentheses to finish it off as a function, and then a semicolon at the end. So this will go through every object in your Unity scene and try to find the object that has the player health component attached to it. And then it will return that and put it in the player variable. This is not a fast function. It takes quite a lot of time and processing power, so you should not use it very often. You should not use it in an update loop that will happen every single frame. But we're not doing that. We're using it in start, which only happens once at the beginning of the game running, so we don't have to worry too much. It's okay that it's an expensive function. Let's put some comments here to remind ourselves what we just did. So we search the scene for the object with player health attached, and then store the player health component from that object in our player variable. Okay, so next we need to actually use this. So we have now our player and we have the icons. So what we need to do is every frame we need to check and see if the each icon should still be displayed. So we will be first of all creating a variable to store the number for each icon, because we're going to use a loop to go through all the icons. We're going to create a variable to check what health value that icon represents, which is going to be pretty easy. We'll start at the beginning and we'll assume the first icon represents the health value of 1, and then we'll check the next icon, and that will be the next health value up. So we'll take 1 and add 1 to it to get 2. Then we'll check the one after that, and we'll take 2 and add 1 to it to get 3, and so on. But we need a variable to keep track of what that current health is. So let's note that to ourselves here. We're going to create a variable to keep track of which item in the list we are on and how much health that icon is worth. Okay, so since we're talking about health and our player's health is measured in int, in whole numbers, integers, we'll also use an int variable, an integer, for our current health for the icon. So let's say int icon health equals 0. Okay, we'll start with 0. And why are we starting with 0 instead of 1? Well, I'll explain in a moment. Basically, for every icon in the list, we'll add 1 to that icon health before we process it. So for the very first icon in the list, we're going to add 1, and we should be at 1 then. So that's why we're starting at 0. Okay, so then we're going to need to go through each icon in the list, and we will do everything inside the brackets that we're about to write for each item in the list, okay? And we're going to have a special variable called icon that's going to get assigned to this. So let's say, well, for each step in the loop, we'll store the current list item in the icon variable. So how do we actually do that with code? All right, so what we need to do is use a for each. And that is a special construct in C# that will allow us to go through a list of objects and look at each item in the list individually. So we first use the word for each, then we need a parenthesis, and inside this parentheses, we're going to say the list that we're going through, which is health icons, all right? But that happens actually at the end of this parentheses section. So yes, we're going to go through health icons, but the first thing we need is actually a temporary variable that will hold each icon as we look through it. So as I said here, for each step in the loop, we're going to store the current list item that we're looking at. We're going to store that in this temporary variable, and we're going to call it icon. So we need to say, as normal with a variable, you need to say what kind of variable it is. So it's going to be a game object, and that type has to match the type of our array up here. So this is an array of game objects. So this temporary variable that we're going to use for each item in the list needs to also be a game object. And then we're going to call it icon. So for each game object icon, and then we need the word in. So for each game object icon in health icons. And that will go through all of the items in the health icons list. And every loop, we're going to store the current icon that we're looking at into this icon variable. All right, so we'll look at icon 1, and it's going to go into icon, and we'll do everything inside this loop. And then we'll go to icon 2, and we'll store it inside icon, and we'll do everything inside this loop. And then we'll go to icon 3, and so on. So once now we have inside our icon variable the current item in the list. So the next thing we're going to do is actually decide what our icon health is. And we do that by adding 1 to whatever it was previously. So right now it's 0 for the very first item in the list. If we add 1 to that, it will end up being 1. Then when we go to the next iteration of our loop, we're going to look at the second icon. It'll get stored there, and then our icon will go up. We'll add 1 to it. So how do we add 1 to a variable? We simply say icon health equals icon health plus 1. So that takes whatever is currently in icon health, it adds 1 to it, and it stores it back into the icon health variable. Okay, so at this point, it would be 1 for the very first item in the list, 2 for the second item in the list, 3 for the third item, and so forth. So let's put a note here about what we're doing. Each icon is worth 1 more health than the last. So we get the current health, add 1 to it, and store the result back into the icon health variable. Does that make sense? So once we now know how much health this icon is worth. Next, we need to ask the player how much health the character currently has. So we can do that using an if statement. We would say if player dot current health is greater than or equal to icon health. So if the player's current health is greater than or equal to the icon's health, then we're going to do something. Now you may notice a problem. We've got a red underline here. And if you mouse over it, what it will say is player health dot current health is inaccessible due to its protection level. And that's because current health is not exposed as a variable that you can edit or see. So we need to change this. We need to add a function to allow us to get the current health of the player. Okay, so we do that in player health. So for now, save what you've got so far in your health display, and then either open from Unity if you don't already have it open. I already have mine open, but you can open up from Unity the player health script. Okay, and if you just double click it, it will open. Mine happens to already be open, and I've got it here. So this is the player health script that we wrote in the previous tutorials. Let's go to the bottom of this, and we're going to add what is called a getter function. These are special functions that happen very often in programming when we want to get a bit of information that is private to that class. Okay, so a getter function by default needs to be public because we want to be able to access it from a different script. And remember, the public keyword is needed whenever you want to access that function from a different script. So we're going to start off with the word public. And instead of void, which is what we usually use for functions, In this case, we are asking for information from this object. And when we ask for information, we need to be given that information. And that void is usually what is saying this function will not give you any extra information. Well, we want information. In this case, we want to know an integer value, which is the current health. So for a getter, you will always have a actual value, an actual returned variable from that function. And you put the type of variable that you're going to be returning as that next word in your function declaration. So instead of void, because we're getting an integer value, we're going to put int. So public int, and then the name of our function. In this case, we're going to call it get health. And this is a function, so make sure you capitalize the G, capitalize the H, but leave no spaces. There should be no spaces in there. Okay, then we have our curly braces. And inside the curly braces, all we need is the word return, which is going to say, here is the information. That's what return is saying. Take this information. The function is done now. Take this information away. And in this case, we're going to return current health. So that's the information we're giving back to the code that's asking for it. Right? So another piece of code will say, get current health. And the player health will say, okay, here's the current health. Okay. So save your player health script whenever you're done with it. Go back to your health display. And instead of current health there, we're going to use get health as a function. And that will replace this chunk of code with the value of the player's current health. So if the player has 3 hit points left, it'll put 3 there. And if 3 is greater than or equal to the value of whatever icon we happen to be looking at that point in time, then the icon will be shown. So how do we make the icon shown? We use icon, which is our, remember icon is our temporary variable there that's containing the icon we're looking at right then in the list. Icon dot set active, and then we're going to put the word true inside there. So that's going to turn on that icon. And it's important to do that. I mean, well, aren't our icons already turned on? Well, they are right now. But what if you lost health and then gained it back due to a healing item or something? You want to make sure you turn those heart icons back on whenever you have successfully healed yourself. Okay, so that will do that. Now, what about if the health is less than the icon health? Well, we can summarize that by an else statement. So basically, if the player health is greater than or equal to the icon's value, we set it active. If it's not, aka if it is less than the icon's value, we will do icon.setActive false. Okay, so else statements happen when the if is not true. Okay, so let's put in some comments here to remind ourselves what this is actually doing. So if the player's current health is equal or greater than the health value for this icon, ... So if those things are true, then turn the icon on. All right, and then for else, we can say otherwise, and in parentheses, you can say the player's health is less than this icon's value, and we can say turn the icon off. Okay, so hopefully that makes it clear what each of these bits of code is doing. Okay, this should be all we need in our scripts. However, we're going to have to do a few more steps in Unity to get this code to work properly. So let's go back to Unity now. Once you've saved your script, make sure you've saved both of your scripts. We'll go back to Unity, and on the heart root, we're going to attach our new script. So our health display, I'm going to drag onto heart root. You can also use add component if you prefer. And you will notice we've got this health icons I've displayed variable in Unity, but it's a bit weird. It says size and then it says equals 0. Right now there is nothing. That is the number of items in this list. So to start off, to make our list work, you need to set a size for it. And in my game, I said that the number of health icons should be 5. So I'm going to change mine to say 5. If you have less or more health icons, that's the number that you should put. Whatever the number of health icons you have should be the size. Now, once I put in 5 and hit enter, I have now a bunch of different items in our list here. Element 0, element 1, element 2. So let's put in heart icon 1 to the top of the list. And the order actually really matters here. So make sure you put them in order, because that's how our loop will work. We'll start at the first item in the list and assume that is 1. And then we'll go to the second item in the list and assume that is 2. So if you don't put them in the right order, they're going to look really, really funny. You're going to lose health like from the middle of your list of your heart icons instead of from the end. Okay, so make sure they're in order. Make sure you don't have any duplicates. Okay, so now I've got my heart icons there. That should be all I need to do. So if I press play now, and I move my character down towards this spike, I lose 2 health, and that's because my spike is set to take 2 health away. That's exactly what I should be seeing. If I hit it again, I lose 2 more health. I'm down to only 1. And if I hit it again, I'll die. Okay, so that's exactly what we should be seeing right now. So we're on track. All right, that's everything for this video. We've now covered how to show icons in your game. If you are having trouble, first of all, as always, check your error messages. Check and make sure your scripts are actually attached to the game objects. Check that you've actually dragged in your icons in order. And if that still isn't working, if something's going wrong and you're not exactly sure what, you can also turn on debug mode on your player to keep an eye on their health as you play. So if you click on the player, you go up to the triple lines in the top right and you choose debug. That will actually allow you to see your player's health in the player health script as you go. So that can be helpful as well. If you're really stuck, please ask in the comments and I will see if I can help you out with it. So for the next steps after this, there will be one more tutorial after this, part 5, which will show you how to use a health bar if you'd prefer that, or you can go back to tutorial part 3, and that will show you how to use text to display your health. There will be more tutorials in the future covering topics like enemy movement, player attacks, etc. But this is all that's going to be part of this series of tutorials. All right, well, thank you very much for watching. I hope this was useful to you. If it was, if you enjoyed this video and found it useful, please give it a like and consider subscribing to our channel for more tutorials and development videos and things like that. I hope you had a wonderful day, and just let me know if you have any questions or concerns in the comments below. Thank you. Bye.